Please welcome Bob Inglis.
Thank you, Joe. It's really exciting to be here. I know you probably wonder whether that's true or not, but it is really true because I had the opportunity last night to spend some time with Joe and to get inspired not only by his speech today, but by what he told me last night. To be with people like Jim Evanoff, who's rather inspiring, and invited me to Yellowstone. You're all witnesses to that invitation, right? So wherever you are, Jim, I'm taking you up on that. To reconnect with my friend Ben Evans, who did an exit interview with me when I got tossed out of Congress, and thankfully kept some of what I said off the record. And my new friend Jessica, who keeps me on time here. So I'm very excited to be here. And I found last night in talking to some of your members at the reception, like Rob, wherever you are from Illinois, grows soybeans. I learned some about tiles in Illinois fields, which is very interesting. And I learned that my tractor mechanic was wrong about the additive that he thought I needed for my fuel. He told me not to buy biodiesel, buy only 100% diesel for my old tractor. I found out last night that he has that exactly backwards, that your stuff is actually has more lubrosity, or however you pronounce that word, than the other stuff. And so now I'm no longer in this quixotic search for real diesel. I'm very happy to get the biodiesel for my old tractor. So that, by the way, I'm not a real farmer. If you're a farmer, you're making a living at it. We've got 3 chickens, down from 20. That's because we feed the foxes. We've got 3 horses, none of which you would find special. They're just special to my wife, who rides them, and cats and dogs, and used to have 5 kids, but now they're grown and gone. So my wife and I are there alone. And we had a wonderful time sledding this weekend, 6 inches of snow in upstate of South Carolina. And we got snow the right way. I was talking to some folks in Minnesota last night. You got snow the wrong way. It comes and it stays. We have nice guests of snow. They come and they leave. So it's pretty much all gone today, and so I'll be able to fly home tomorrow without any trouble. So it really is fun to be here, and it's fun to be with people that have an exciting vision. That's, I think, what I find, in addition to all those fun relationships I was just describing. The most exciting thing about being here is being with people who share a vision for a cleaner, brighter, more prosperous future. And people that plan on making money, inventing and commercializing that future. And so at republican.org, we're for you. And I hope at the end of this talk, you decide that you find value in us, because we want to help spread the vision that you've got of that cleaner, more prosperous, brighter, freer world with more energy, more mobility, more freedom. And so we're a little bit odd in this space on climate change, because sometimes the message is presented by the environmental left. And they present a message that basically says, you are an invasive species. We need to do with less of you. Well, that's not our message. Our message is we were meant to be here, and it's an exciting place to be, and that free enterprise can solve this problem of climate change. And but let me back up and tell you a little bit about myself before I get into asking you some questions. And we're going to have some Q&A here, so you can get ready with your questions for me. So, but first, let me give you a little bit of background. I represented perhaps the reddest district in the reddest state in the nation. Anybody want to fight me for that distinction? There might be a Texan here that wants to say, or somebody from Idaho, but I don't know. We're pretty doggone conservative, Greenville, Spartanburg, South Carolina. It's to prove, anybody talking about climate change, you assume is a mushy moderate, right? If he's a Republican, he's probably a mushy moderate if he's talking about climate change, right? So let me disabuse you of that notion. Let's see, 93 American Conservative Union rating. That's not a perfect score, but it is an A. It's maybe a low A, but a 93 American Conservative Union rating. 100% Christian Coalition, 100% National Right to Life, A with the NRA, 0 with the Americans for Democratic Action, 23 by some mistake with the AFL-CIO. I was really hoping for a 0. Those are my lifetime ratings from 12 years in Congress. First 6 years in Congress, I said climate change was hooey, Al Gore's imagination. I hadn't looked into it at all. All I knew was that he was for it. That was the end of the inquiry. Then I was out 6 years, doing commercial real estate law again. That means I'm really not a farmer, as I pointed out. I just live on this farmette. But I was a commercial real estate lawyer for 6 years again. And so I was running for Congress after that 6-year break in 2004. My son, the oldest of our 5 kids, came to me. And he just turned 18. He was voting for the first time. He said to me, "Dad, I'll vote for you, but you're going to clean up your act on the environment." It was the first of 3 steps for me in this metamorphosis on climate change. By the way, some people have mistaken that as some sort of a threat from my son. It would not have been in my son's economic interest to vote against me, okay? I mean, if we had lost by 1 vote, he would be really upset because we had invested basically all we had in that race. And so I knew that my son was going to vote for me. What he's really saying was, "Dad, I love you, and you can be better than you are. So let's do it. Get to the better." That's what he was saying. Step 1. Step 2 was getting on the science committee, going to Antarctica, seeing the evidence in the ice core drillings. We'll go into that in the Q&A time if you want to about what that is. And then step 3 was something of a spiritual awakening for me. I was another science committee trip, seeing coral bleaching at the Great Barrier Reef. Aussie climate scientists showing me this. And I could tell that I shared a worldview with Scott Heron before any words were spoken. You know, St. Francis of Assisi said, "Preach the gospel at all times. If necessary, use words." And so Scott was preaching the gospel, and I could tell the way that he was interacting with nature that he was worshiping the God of creation. And so I knew that we shared a worldview. Afterwards, we had a chance to talk. Scott told me about conservation changes he's making in his life in order to love God and love people. Things like he rides his bike to work. He won't take elevators, he takes stairs. You know, he hangs out the laundry to dry. You know, I mean, he's very committed and intentional to actually thinking about loving God and loving people by those steps. Well, I got quite inspired. I came home and decided to introduce the Raise Wages, Cut Carbon Act of 2009. Note to self, do not introduce carbon tax in midst of Great Recession. It will not go well for you in the reddest district and the reddest state in the nation. And it did not go well. Now, I'd committed some other heresies too. I'd been for comprehensive immigration reform, although we never called it that. I voted against the troop surge because I had conservative concerns about what my friend George Bush was doing by way of nation building in Iraq. That's what I thought. And I voted for TARP, which can never be forgiven by the Tea Party. But my most enduring heresy was just saying that climate change is real, and let's do something about it. And so I got tossed out of Congress after 12 years in Congress in a Republican runoff. Trey Gowdy got 71% of the vote, and I got 29% of the vote. And so to my great benefit, a foundation came to me and said, "You know, you are an unusual zoo animal, a conservative who says climate change is real. Will you speak and write for this proposition?" I said, well, if the cage is nice and the food is good, and the cage is very nice here in Tampa, and the food has been very good, and it's fun to be with fun people. So I'm very happy with what I'm doing now because it gives me the opportunity to be about something that's big enough to be about. And I think that's what you are. You're about something that's big enough to be about. Yes, you're making money, I hope, while you're doing it, because again, we at Republican.org think this is about free enterprise. So we want you to make money. But you're also about something, sort of like my friend Scott Heron in Australia, you're about something bigger. You've got a bigger dream in mind. And so that's pretty exciting to me. It's very exciting to me to be with such people. Now, these are the people we're trying to reach. We are trying to reach fellow conservatives. I'm just sort of curious. I want to see. I'm not exactly sure how to ask the question, but I'm just going to ask a show of hands here. I got to find out about my audience here. Who here would join with me in thinking that Ronald Reagan was a particularly good president? Raise your hand if you think Ronald Reagan was a particularly good president. Okay, I'm in good shape. This is good. Okay, I'm in target audience territory. Maybe some people from some red states, or maybe you're a lone red outpost in a blue state. In any event, the folks we're trying to reach are fellow conservatives. And so they've been hiding. They've been in places that, have gone into denial. And if you watch the film tonight, Merchants of Doubt, you'll see how that's really quite an industry. So we tell them to come out wherever you are. We tell them you can stop biting your tongue now. We tell them that there is a tribe out here that's ready to act on climate change. And that basically you're just not alone. Because that Michael Shermer piece from Merchants of Doubt is spot on. What this is about is a heart issue and an affinity and a belonging issue. It has very little to do with the head. Some people, when they talk about climate change, make the mistake, well, all you got to do is just present the science to people. Well, actually, people who dismiss climate change are more scientifically literate than the general population. It's not a question of scientific literacy. It's a question of the heart. It's whether you want to do this and what it says about you if you're going to do it, if you're going to sign up for this proposition. And so, yet another reason that I'm very excited to be talking to you is I have the sense, particularly in last night's conversations, that some of you come from some places that are red and have friends and neighbors and family members who are really conservative people, who see a future that's, as I said at the outset, that's brighter than the future we're in now, and who see a way forward. And that you have the courage, and it really is courage, to define a new affinity group, people that are conservative, let's say, and before I finish here, I really will speak for a moment to progressives, but mostly, obviously, I'm speaking to you conservatives because you got to come out wherever you are kind of thing. That's what we do. But I believe that given what I was hearing last night from people, that you're people who see this brighter future and who are willing to who have the courage to declare that. And that is really exciting. Because Shermer is right. What this is affinity. It's what it says about you and what tribe you're a member of. You see, when I crossed the tribal boundary and supported something that sounded like Al Gore, I had a primary opponent in 2008 who called me the Al Gore of the Republican Party. He did not mean it as a compliment. It stuck, by the way, in 10, and I was sort of seen as the Al Gore of the Republican Party. But here's the thing, and here's where I guess I will speak to those progressives in the audience. There's a guy named Art Laffer, who is Ronald Reagan's economics advisor. Remember the Laffer curve that basically says if you cut capital gains tax rates, the government will actually get an increase in revenue because people are sitting on assets. They're not selling them. If those assets turn, the government gets transactions tax off of that and capital gains. John Kennedy proved it in the 1960s. Ronald Reagan proved it in the 1980s, and Art Laffer is the father of that, or the economist that explained that effect. Art Laffer is a neighbor of Al Gore's in Nashville, Tennessee. Literally neighbors. Art has been over to Al's house. They talked it through, and they came to the conclusion that they could both support a revenue-neutral, border-adjustable carbon tax for very different reasons. Al, because he's excited about the emissions reduction. Art, because he's excited about reducing taxes on income. Art tells us it's a no-brainer. Change what you tax. You're currently taxing income, something you want more of. You're not taxing emissions, something you maybe want less of. He says maybe because he says he's agnostic about climate change. He doesn't know whether it's real or not. But what Art would tell you if he were here is he doesn't need to know whether it's real. He knows you're taxing income. Get off of that. Tax emissions instead. Now, here's the thing. If you're planning on going home to one of those red districts and running for Congress, you might want to go around talking like this. You might want to say, I'm for a revenue-neutral, border-adjustable carbon tax, because that last thing is going to get you in some trouble. Because here's the thing. You got to go around saying, what I want is your electricity bill to go up, your gasoline prices to go up, your diesel prices to go up. Vote Inglis, Congress, right? I mean, it's, but then you have to quickly tell them, but I want to cut your taxes elsewhere. So there's going to be more money in your pocket. We're going to untax some form of income. And at Republican.org, we are rather ecumenical as to what kind of tax cut that would be. If you want to cut corporate income taxes, we're for you. If you want to cut individual income taxes, we're for you. If you want to cut payroll taxes, that has a real benefit of reducing the regressivity of a carbon tax so that poor people aren't hit harder than wealthy people. We're for any of those. We just want to change what we tax, get off of income, get on emissions. And we insist on it being, second imperative for us at Republican.org, it's got to be border adjustable. Now that's sort of government speak for basically that imports have to pay the same tax. You can't have a situation where American producers are punished while manufacturers are punished when goods can come in from elsewhere having not paid the carbon tax. So we would apply it on entry. Now, if there's some trade lawyers in the room, you know there's a question there about WTO compliance, and it is a legitimate question, but we think we can win that argument in the WTO because there are precedents in the chemical industry for taxing the content of the goo based on what's in the goo when it's imported. And so if we base the tax on the content of the carbon CO2 within, say, flat steel coming from China, then we can tax it on entry into the United States. Now, see if you follow me on this. We think that it would take, if we're right at Republican.org, and if we win that in the WTO, we think that China, within 24 hours, because they have an amazing way of reaching consensus, will impose the very same price on carbon dioxide. Why? Because they'd figure out within 24 hours that, let's see, on entry into, say, the Port of Philadelphia, we're paying a carbon tax for that flat steel that's remitted to Washington. We could have collected this in China and remitted that same amount to Beijing. 24 hours later, they've got the same carbon tax. And then the whole world follows suit, because if the two major economies are doing it, the whole world will do it. And then we've got energy at its true cost. And then what happens, I think, to biodiesel is that it becomes way more attractive than it already is. It becomes really economic. And then people start buying your product even more. And very exciting things happen, and you fulfill your vision of not just making a buck, which is a good thing to do, but also being about something that's big enough to be about, to actually make that brighter, cleaner world. I'm going to stop here and ask for your questions and comments. I think they've got some microphones, and the idea is you're supposed to stand up and ask a question when you get a microphone. But before I do, I'm going to show you this last slide, because I'm hoping that before I leave here today, that a lot of people are going to text EN to that number right there. It's 66866. Note that that is not the mark of the beast. There's an 8 between it. And it's 4 6s, it's not 3, and there's an 8 between it. So anyway, I'm a little bit nervous. I have to explain that, okay? Particularly where I come from, South Carolina. I got to explain that is not the mark of the beast. It's 66866. Because before I leave here, I'm hoping that a lot of you are going to say that, yes, there's value in getting Republicans on board, getting conservatives to join this effort. And if you want to do that with us, we really need you, because we need to be able to show that you exist. Because a lot of people, a lot of members of Congress haven't been to Tampa to see the National Biodiesel Board and to have a reception last night and to talk to people that are actually doing this. And if they did, they would see that it's their people and that they can present this and a new affinity group can come forward, conservatives who actually care about climate change. So let me see hear your questions or comments. I'm interested in your comments as well. You just got to stand up and here's somebody over here. Here comes a microphone for you.
Hi, thank you for your wonderful comments. I'm from Canada. I live in a jurisdiction that has had a carbon tax since 2008. It is doing nothing for biofuels. It could do something for biofuels if it were designed well. So thank you. I think it's a great initiative, and I would encourage you to work with people who have experience in working with this kind of mechanism to make sure that it's structured and designed properly so that it really does reward the low carbon values and benefits of biodiesel.
Wait, let me follow up with that. Is it because the price signal isn't strong enough? This is in British Columbia, I take it, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And so is the price signal not strong enough? Is that why it's not helping you in biodiesel?
The price, obviously, as it goes up, provides a stronger signal, but what British Columbia decided to do, we understand why they did it in 2008, is they took administrative convenience and they assumed that all fuels in the province had 5% renewable content, and decided that renewable content had 0 carbon, and so they taxed at the pump all fuels at 95% of the carbon tax. What they needed to do was put that carbon tax at the wholesale rack so that a person could say, I want B20 and I'm going to only be taxed for 80% of the fuel. And 2 other things they need to do. You need to actually recognize that biofuels are less energy dense, so you end up putting the same price of carbon on a biofuel. You're actually overtaxing it. So you want to tax it on its energy density, and you want to actually tax it on its real carbon intensity. You don't want to just give all biofuels the same carbon intensity, because some are very high carbon. Some biofuels have no benefit over diesel or gasoline. So you want to do your homework properly, and
Wow.
and in that case, it can be a wonderful price signal.
That's very helpful. Yeah, that's why it's very helpful that people like British Columbia have done this so that we can learn from them. That's really good advice to make sure that what you're doing, the reason I think that's good advice, and I hope everybody was following that, and I hope I followed it, it's basically, the reason it's such good advice and so consistent with what conservatives believe, it's all about accountability. We want the price to be reflected at the pump and at the meter. If it is, in the liberty of enlightened self-interest, people do things that create innovation. The current lack of accountability is why we don't have as much innovation as we could have. You're innovating in a situation where there are some renewable fuel standards and some tax incentives, But if there were full accountability in the way that we were just hearing, the economics, the pure economics would drive that innovation without having to go to Congress and ask for something. And so that's the message that we're taking to conservatives. We had an event at the University of Chicago called "What Would Milton Friedman Do About Climate Change?" And of course, conservatives sort of bow at the mention of Milton Friedman's name, you know. Well, what would Milton Friedman do? He'd put all the cost in on all the fuels and eliminate all the subsidies. And then say, now, compete. Level playing field, full accountability, so that we can see your whole cost. Because if I'm Inglis Industries and I'm making coal-fired electricity like I assume that plant is that I was looking out of my hotel window this morning and seeing the smoke coming out, if I'm Inglis Industries, and my great-grandfather actually was from down here, came from Scotland and came here to Inglis, Florida, actually. If I'm Inglis Industries and I'm making that coal-fired electricity, I'm currently getting away with socializing my soot. Well, we conservatives don't like to socialize anything, right? And so, but I get away with socializing my soot. And I get away with socializing my climate cost. If that was on the meter, then all kinds of people across the sunny state of Florida, the Sunshine State, would be putting on solar panels on their roof. But they're not, because it's not on the meter. When the economics, when it becomes in their economic interest, because now the full cost is on the meter and you got full accountability, then the free enterprise system works. It's when there are those unrecognized negative externalities. Now, that's a great way to get elected to Congress, let me tell you. Go around saying, I once said to the Greenville News reporter, Greenville, South Carolina News reporter, I said, we got to internalize the negative externalities. He said, what'd you say, Bob? And I said, internalize the negative externalities. He said, come again, man. We write at a 7th grade level. I can't put that in this paper. And I said, okay, well then reveal the hidden cost. He said, yep, I can put that. Reveal the hidden cost. So anyway, that's what we're about. And that's, I think, completely consistent with what bedrock conservatism is. Yes, in the back.
Hi, thanks for your comments, and including that a lot of people in the audience are involved in marketing in red states. So you've got all this experience. So when they go to market, whether it's to their policymaker or to their customer, how would you advise connecting biodiesel to climate change?
Yeah, great question, because I think that I'd start with what Joe started with, which is real respect for the science. I mean, particularly if you're talking about people that are actually selling to other people real products, right? That's, I'm in the business of selling ideas. It's a more ephemeral kind of business, I guess. When you're selling a real product, you can talk to them about long-term, the accountability is coming. There's a reason that ExxonMobil and all the other majors have an internal price on carbon dioxide in all their investment decisions. They assume, in the case of Royal Dutch Shell, for example, I think it's $40 a ton CO2. So if you work for Royal Dutch Shell and you want to get capital from the Home Office to do some expansion at your plant, you've got to show that it makes money at a $40 per ton price on carbon dioxide. And so what I'd say is you market to people their real products to real customers is get ready for the future. And we're a way to help you get ready for the future, particularly if we do what we just learned from British Columbia to make sure that it's apples to apples. In other words, that the biodiesel is respected for the benefits that it brings in that marketplace. So I think it's a talk about the costs are coming in on this. And when they do, you want to be in the future spot. Other questions and comments? I'm interested in your comments too. Give me some advice about how to get this done and how to persuade, especially if you're from a red state. I'm interested in any advice you have or thoughts. Well, while you're thinking about that advice, because obviously we need it, some people would say, you know, Inglis, it's a tough slog. Well, it is until there's a critical mass. And then the critical mass, the tipping point comes, and things really do move rather rapidly. So we've seen that many times in legislation, and it's going to happen, I believe, in this carbon tax environment. The question is whether really it is, should we care, or is this something that we can just sort of put off for the future? Tell me, what if you? I'm sort of curious. Another show of hands. I asked earlier if you were conservative, or it's a dangerous word because sometimes you have to figure out, now, what kind of conservative you're talking about. You're talking about somebody that, well, anyway, we go through a whole list of things that maybe we lose some people that don't want to be defined as conservatives. But let me ask you this. I'm going to give you a couple of options. One is that climate change is real, and then climate change is human-caused. And then the third option is I'm not really sure about climate change yet. I'm just curious about the audience here. So who here would say that climate change is real? And then put your hand down if you, keep them up if you think it's real. But then if you think it's not human-caused, put your hand down if you think it's not human-caused. And then now you can put those hands down. Tell me, if you're really not convinced about climate change and really uncertain and still to be convinced, raise your hand. So, okay, that's very helpful. So now then, the question is, how do we get everybody? We just had enough votes in here to pass this legislation in the U.S. Congress. That it would be so in the Congress, right? The presidential race is on, and it really does show, I think, the challenge that we're in, which is that people are threatened by globalization. That's the main challenge we're facing. What used to be a protected country by oceans and by a long lead we had on the rest of the world is being challenged by the internet and PC and the ability to have the marriage of labor and capital over the internet and the PC. And the result is that, American economy here, rest of the world here, markets insist on equilibrium. That is unacceptable, right? I mean, if we come down, somebody loses standard of living. They lose central air conditioning, they lose a hot water heater, they lose a job, they lose something in order to reach equilibrium that way. And so, of course, if the rest of the world rises to us, this would be a good thing, particularly I was on foreign affairs. That reduces a foreign affairs problem, foreign relations problem, because there's natural resentment of wealth, right? The best situation, though, is that we're rising while the rest of the world's rising. Then we have a rising tide lifting all boats. And so the question is how to engineer that future, how to make that happen. We think at Republican.org that energy and climate is actually a huge opportunity. And apparently that's what you all think, because that's what I was hearing in Joe's talk earlier, and that's what I was hearing last night, is that you think that there's a really bright future. It really is quite different, I suppose, to present this that way. We call ourselves energy optimist and climate realist. And in further answer to the question in the back, how would I present this to people? Now we're talking more Uncle Charlie, who's coming for Easter or Passover. He's the guy that shows up and says, this climate change stuff is hooey. And you are there at the table, and you've got now to say something to Charlie. And the way that we think you can talk to Charlie is make sure that Charlie knows that you're not talking about, say, regulating something down, and that you are an invasive species, and that we've got to control this through further government regulation. Because if Charlie is the kind of Charlie that my oldest brother is, and I'll be seeing him, I suppose, at Easter, that won't work with my brother, right? So what we present is this idea that, no, we're energy optimists and climate realists. We want more energy, more mobility, more freedom. And we're also, like Joe talking earlier, celebrating the science and wanting to follow the science wherever it goes. So let me give you another opportunity, see if there are other, is there somebody back in the back? Yes, sir.
Yes, from Kansas. Is the sun's activity starting to come into the whole formula here? I've heard that's been kind of ignored for a while, so, as far as global warming is concerned. Is that being brought into the equation?
Yeah, you'll hear that a lot, especially from your neighbor, I suppose, Jim Inhofe, who, by the way, is a friend of mine. I like Jim, and there's not really a but coming. We do disagree on this. But Jim is a very sincere, dear man. And if you know him, you know that he does mission trips in Africa. He's a very committed Christian believer. And he's a very sweet man. And I like Jim Inhofe. And Jim, if you listen to some things he says, I think you would hear him say it's sunspots. It's basically explosions and the hydrogen explosion that is the sun that come and go such that there's more radiant heat or radiation aimed at the earth, and that's what's causing, it's a natural cycle, is what some people would say. I'm not a scientist. I'm sort of like you heard on the Merchants of Doubt Club. I used to play one when the lights came on at science committee. But what I understand from the scientists, particularly wonderful people like Catherine Hayhoe in Texas, is that it doesn't explain the current changes in climate. If you plot the sunspots, which we know exist, and we track those things, they don't correlate. The correlation is quite weak with rising temperatures on Earth. And so, yeah, does that answer the question, I guess? Or is that?
Well, I just want to make sure it's getting a fair, trial, I guess, or somebody's mentioning it, or if it does fit into the equation, it's done that. Also,
yeah.
One other thing, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
It's carbon, I think you're talking about. I understand, and I'm not a scientist myself either, that methane is 30 times worse for this issue of climate change. And somehow that gets exempted, and there's a lot of methane emissions coming from what are considered clean fuels. So is that going to be part of the whole discussion?
Yeah, you're right. Methane is a more powerful greenhouse gas than CO2. It doesn't last as long as in the atmosphere, but still, for the period of time that it's present before it deteriorates, it is a more powerful greenhouse gas. And everybody understands the greenhouse effect here is that light from those sunspots enters, but the heat that's generated here, the warming, doesn't all escape because of the presence of greenhouse gases, CO2, methane, other gases. Thank the Lord that that's the case. If it weren't the case, we'd boil when the sun was on us, we'd freeze when it was nighttime. So the presence of those gases is really a blessing to us. It's just when you put more and more and more on it, it's sort of like one electric blanket this winter might be comfortable, but 3, 4, you are sweating, right? And so, yeah, methane is a serious greenhouse gas. We need accountability there as well. Now, once you burn methane, by the way, and turn it into CO2, you in that process, for example, produce 50% less CO2 by making gas-fired electricity than you do coal-fired electricity. So in a lot of ways, the reductions we've seen in CO2 in the United States are because of the natural gas revolution and the price of natural gas coming down. So I might end on that note, if I may. The idea of what we see is that the economics working, because it's a great case study. There's a lot of talk about the war on coal, and how the president's out to get coal. Well, I'd say to you this, Saving Private Ryan, when the captain is down at the end and he's got the handgun out and he's shooting at the tank that's coming at him, that's Barack Obama in the war on coal. He's got a little handgun that he's shooting at the tank. The tank is George Mitchell, the perfecter of fracking, who's dead now, but he perfected fracking, making it possible for more gas to be extracted, supply increased, price dropped, and 6 coal-fired plants are converting to natural gas in South Carolina right now, and all across the country, the same thing's happening. That's the war on coal. But it proves the point we're making, that it's economics that will drive this. That if you set the economics straight, the environment will take care of itself. This is a problem of economics, not a problem of the environment. And so setting those economic straights is what we're about, and I'm here to tell you too that it's something that progressives can be about too, because as I said earlier, Al Gore's for it, we're for it. Someday we're going to bring America together into a celebration of accountability, celebration of the science that Joe was talking about, and showing that America can lead again. If you want to be part of helping us do that, and if you see value in coming alongside you and the vision that you've got, please do text to that number or go to the republicen.org website and sign up. We need your picture to prove that you exist. Take you about 3 minutes, and we will be able to show your member of Congress and senators that you exist, that there is an eco-right to answer the environmental left, and that together we can solve this problem. Thanks for the opportunity to be with you.